In the heart of the city stands the Vane Plaza, a 60-story monolith of glass and cold ambition. Thousands of people pass through its revolving doors every day, but none are as invisible as Elias. To the executives in their $5,000 suits, Elias is nothing more than a shadow in a faded navy jumpsuit, a man who exists only to erase their footprints and empty their wastebaskets. They look through him, never at him. But tonight, a split-second decision on a rain-slicked curb is about to reveal that the man they treat like dirt actually owns the ground they stand on. The clock in the lobby of Vane Industries struck 6 p.m., the chime echoing through the cavernous marble hall. For most, it was the signal to head home to penthouse apartments and expensive dinners. For Elias, it was the start of his shift. At 58, Elias moved with a slow, rhythmic grace that belied the stiffness in his joints. He lived in a cramped cubicle at the St. Jude's Men's Shelter, 3 miles and a world away from the luxury of the plaza. Every night, he walked those 3 miles, his breath blooming in the cold air, to take up his post. He didn't mind the work. The scent of floor wax and the hum of the industrial vacuum were predictable. They didn't ask questions. They didn't remind him of the life he had lost 20 years ago. "Hey, mop monkey. You missed a spot near the elevators," a young junior executive barked, intentionally dropping a half-full latte on the pristine floor. Elias didn't look up. He didn't argue. He simply steered his bucket toward the spill. "I'll get it right away, sir," he said, his voice a low, cultured rasp that the executive was too arrogant to notice. "See that you do," the man sneered, stepping over the mess and vanishing into the night. Elias cleaned the spill with practiced ease. He was used to the insults. They were the price of his anonymity. For 2 decades, he had hidden in the margins of society, watching the company he had co-founded, Vane and Thorne, become simply Vane Industries. His former partner, Marcus Vane, had orchestrated a hostile takeover that stripped Elias of his shares, his reputation, and eventually, his home. Marcus was dead now, and the empire was run by his daughter, Juliana Vane, a woman known as the Iron Queen. Elias was finishing the lobby windows when he saw her. Juliana Vane was stepping out of a private elevator, her heels clicking like a metronome on the marble. She was clutching the hand of a small boy, no more than 5 years old, who was excitedly waving a plastic dinosaur. "Stay close, Leo," Juliana said, her voice sharp with the stress of a billion-dollar merger. She was distracted, her eyes glued to the glowing screen of her phone as she gestured for her driver. Leo, however, had spotted something. A bright red ball had rolled out from a display case toward the heavy revolving doors, and then out onto the busy street. With the impulsive speed of a child, Leo broke free from his mother's grip. "Leo! No!" Juliana screamed, but she was too far behind. Elias saw it before anyone else. A black sedan was racing to beat the yellow light, its engine roaring. The driver was looking down, perhaps at a phone, perhaps at a coffee. He didn't see the small boy in the yellow raincoat stepping into the crosswalk. Time seemed to fracture. The world slowed to the beat of Elias's heart. He didn't think about his age. He didn't think about his bruised ribs or his tired legs. Elias dropped his squeegee and bolted. He moved with a burst of speed that shouldn't have been possible, his boots skidding on the wet pavement. He reached the boy just as the screech of brakes tore through the air. Elias didn't try to pull Leo back. There wasn't time. Instead, he wrapped his arms around the child and threw his own body forward, using his momentum to propel them both toward the opposite curb. The impact was a dull, sickening thud. The car's fender clipped Elias's hip, sending him spinning into a metal lamppost. Leo was tucked tightly against Elias's chest, shielded by the man's heavy jumpsuit and the sheer force of his embrace. Silence fell over the street, broken only by the hiss of the car's radiator and the distant sound of Juliana's sobbing breath as she ran toward them. "Leo! My baby," she shrieked, collapsing on the sidewalk. Elias groaned, a sharp, white-hot pain blooming in his side. His vision blurred, the bright lights of the Vane Plaza sign dancing like dying stars. He loosened his grip, and Leo scrambled out, shaken and crying, but unhurt. He's okay, Elias wheezed, his head lolling back against the cold metal of the post. Juliana gathered her son into her arms, checking him frantically. Only then did she look at the man who had saved him. She saw the stained navy jumpsuit. She saw the Vane Plaza logo on his breast pocket. She saw the dirt beneath his fingernails and the gray stubble on his weary face. "Oh, God," she whispered, her eyes filled with a mixture of horror and pity. "Someone call an ambulance. This janitor is hurt." As the sirens began to wail in the distance, Elias felt a strange sense of peace. He looked up at the top floor of the building, the floor where his office used to be. He knew that tomorrow, his life as the Invisible Man was over. He had saved the grandson of the man who destroyed him. And hidden in his pocket, soaked in his own blood, was a weathered silver key, the only thing he had kept from the old vault in the basement of that very building. The janitor had saved the heir, but the queen had no idea that she was now in debt to the true king. The sterile white walls of the City General Hospital were a jarring contrast to the dim, wax-scented hallways of Vane Plaza. Elias lay in a narrow bed, the rhythm of the heart monitors a steady, mechanical reminder that he was still among the living. His hip was fractured, and 3 ribs were cracked, but the physical pain paled in comparison to the unease of being seen. For 20 years, his safety had been his obscurity. Now, he was a person of interest. The door to his room swung open with a sharp, decisive click. Juliana Vane stepped in. Without the backdrop of her corporate empire, she looked smaller, but no less formidable. She was dressed in a tailored cream suit, clutching a leather folder as if it were a shield. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice practiced and cool. Elias stiffened. "Thorne." It had been decades since anyone had used his real last name. He looked at her, his eyes sharp despite the haze of painkillers. "The name on my payroll file is Elias Miller," he said hoarsely. Juliana pulled a chair to the bedside, her expression unreadable. "My investigators are very thorough, Elias. They found it strange that a janitor with no prior background check or social security history has been working in my building for 5 years. They found an old record." Elias Thorne, co-founder of Vane & Thorne. My father's former partner. She paused, waiting for a reaction. Elias simply stared at the ceiling. "I don't care about the past," Juliana continued, opening her folder. "I'm here because you saved my son's life. Leo hasn't stopped asking about the superhero in the blue suit. I owe you a debt, and the Vanes always pay their debts." She pulled out a check and laid it on the bedside table. The number was staggering, $500,000. Enough to buy a house, a new life, and a quiet retirement. "This is for your medical bills and a thank you for your service," she said. "Consider it a settlement. You'll never have to mop another floor again." Elias looked at the check. To anyone at the shelter, this was a winning lottery ticket. To him, it was an insult disguised as a gift. It was the same way her father, Marcus, had handled people buying their silence and calling it generosity. With a shaky hand, Elias reached out. He didn't pick up the check. He pushed it back toward her. "I didn't save your son for a payout, Juliana," Elias said, his voice regaining some of its old, resonant authority. "I saved him because he's a child and he was in danger." "Keep your money." Juliana's eyes narrowed. "Don't be a martyr, Elias. You live in a shelter. You have nothing." "I have my dignity," he countered. "Something your father tried very hard to take from me. He didn't succeed then, and you won't succeed now." The tension in the room was thick enough to choke the air. Juliana stood up, her composure finally flickering. "My father spoke of you once. He said you were a brilliant man who didn't have the stomach for the realities of business. He said you walked away." "I didn't walk away," Elias whispered, his voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "He forged my signature on the divestment papers while I was in the hospital burying my wife." He took the empire we built and turned it into a machine that crushes people. And now, you're running that machine. Juliana felt a chill run down her spine. She wanted to dismiss him as a bitter old man, but the conviction in his eyes was terrifying. Before she could respond, the door pushed open again. Little Leo burst in, carrying a small bunch of crumpled dandelions he'd picked from the hospital garden. Superhero! Leo cheered, running to the side of the bed. Juliana watched as the invisible man, the man her father had cast out into the cold, softened instantly. Elias took the flowers with a gentle smile, his scarred hands trembling as he patted the boy's head. "Thank you, Leo," Elias said softly. "They're beautiful." Juliana saw the connection, and for a moment, the Iron Queen felt a crack in her armor. She looked at the rejected check on the table. She had tried to pay a debt, but she realized that some debts, the kind that involve a life saved and a legacy stolen, don't have a price tag. As she led Leo out of the room, she turned back one last time. The board of directors is meeting tomorrow to discuss the merger. They're worried about the PR situation involving a staff member. "They want you gone, Elias." "I'm sure they do," Elias replied, his eyes turning cold again. "But tell them this, I still have the silver key to the subterranean vault. The one your father never managed to open. The one that contains the original founding articles of this company." Juliana froze. The subterranean vault was a legend at Vane Plaza, a room no locksmith or drill had ever breached. "If they want me gone," Elias said, "tell them to come and fire me themselves." In the boardroom, Elias reaching into his bedside drawer, pulling out the weathered silver key, and gripping it so hard his knuckles turned white. The janitor wasn't just going back to work, he was going to reclaim his throne. The hospital room felt smaller as the sun began to set, casting long, skeletal shadows across Elias's bed. As he gripped the silver key, the present faded, and the ghosts of 20 years ago began to scream. To the world, Vane Industries was a titan of progress, but to Elias, it was a monument built on the grave of a friendship. The flashback: 20 years ago, the office had smelled of expensive cigars and ambition. Young Elias Thorne stood at the window of their first real headquarters, overlooking the city he intended to change. Behind him, Marcus Vane, his best friend and partner, was pouring 2 glasses of scotch. "We did it, Elias," Marcus had said, his eyes gleaming with a hunger that Elias hadn't yet learned to fear. "Vane and Thorne. The city is ours." Elias had smiled, but his mind was on the community trust clause he had written into their founding charter. He wanted to build low-income housing. Marcus wanted to build luxury high-rises. The conflict was a slow burn until the night of the accident. Elias's wife, Sarah, had been the one to keep him grounded. When the car crash took her life, Elias's world went black. He remembered the blur of the funeral, the heavy rain, and the way Marcus had squeezed his shoulder, whispering, "Don't worry about the business, Elias. I'll handle everything. Just grieve." While Elias sat in a darkened room, paralyzed by loss, Marcus was in the boardroom. He didn't just handle the business, he amputated Elias from it. He used a forged power of attorney to sign over Elias's shares to a shell company. By the time Elias emerged from his grief, he was a stranger in his own building. He was told there had been a restructuring. His keycard didn't work. His bank accounts were frozen in legal disputes. Marcus hadn't just taken his money, he had erased his existence. The present day, a soft knock at the door brought Elias back to the cold hospital room. It wasn't Juliana this time. It was an older man, stooped and wearing a security uniform. It was Arthur, the only person at Vane Plaza who had been there long enough to remember the Thorne in Vane and Thorne. "I heard what happened, Elias," Arthur whispered, checking the hallway before stepping in. "The board, they're panicking. Juliana told them about the key. They think you're bluffing." "It's no bluff, Arthur," Elias said, his voice regaining its steel. "Marcus never could get into that vault. He thought I'd lost the key in the crash. He didn't realize I had it buried in Sarah's jewelry box. They're moving the board meeting up to tonight, Arthur warned. They want to vote on the merger before you can make a move. If that merger goes through, the company will be folded into a global conglomerate. The original charter and your proof will be shredded legally. Elias looked at his fractured hip, then at the silver key. He couldn't walk 3 miles tonight. He could barely stand. Arthur, I need you to do something for me, Elias said. In the maintenance closet on the 4th floor, behind the industrial heaters, there's a loose floorboard. I've been keeping a box there for 5 years. It has my old journals, the original blueprints, and my suit. Arthur's eyes widened. You've been planning this since the day you started mopping those floors. I wasn't planning a coup, Arthur. I was waiting for a sign. And today, when I held that boy in my arms, I realized Marcus's blood still flows through that building, but so does Sarah's dream. I won't let them fold this company into a shadow. An hour later, Juliana Vane stood at the head of the mahogany boardroom table. The city's most powerful investors sat before her, their faces impatient. The merger is a formality, one director stated, tapping a gold pen. The janitor issue is a PR blip. We offer him $1 million and a non-disclosure agreement. He'll take it and vanish. He already turned down $500,000, Juliana reminded them, her voice troubled. He didn't even blink. Then we discredit him, the director shrugged. He's a homeless man with a history of mental instability. Who would believe? The heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. The room went silent. Standing in the doorway, supported by a heavy wooden cane and leaning slightly on Arthur, was Elias. He wasn't wearing the navy jumpsuit. He was wearing a charcoal wool suit outdated by 2 decades, but tailored to perfection. His hair was slicked back, his posture commanding despite the visible pain in his face. He didn't look like a janitor. He looked like the man the building had been named for. I believe the floor is mine, Elias said, his voice echoing with the authority of a founder. Juliana stood frozen. In Elias's hand, the silver key caught the light of the chandelier, reflecting like a star. The merger cannot proceed, Elias announced, limping toward the table. Because Vane Industries does not have a clear title. And I'm here to show you exactly what's hidden beneath your feet, the board members whispering in shock, while Juliana looks at Elias and realizes that the invisible man has finally stepped into the light and he's brought the truth with him. The air in the boardroom was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and cheap fear. For the directors of Vane Industries, Elias Thorne was supposed to be a ghost story, a name whispered in the archives to scare junior associates. But seeing him stand there, battered but unbroken, felt like the dead had come to reclaim the living. This is an outrage, shouted Sterling, the lead director, a man whose greed was as sharp as his silk tie. Security! Remove this vagrant immediately. Arthur, the old security guard, didn't move. He stood behind Elias like a sentinel. My apologies, Mr. Sterling, Arthur said softly, but my scanner shows Mr. Thorne's biometrics are still listed in the founding emergency protocols. Technically, he has as much right to be in this room as you do. Juliana Vane remained silent, her eyes locked on Elias. She saw the pain in his face, the way he leaned heavily on his cane. But she also saw a fire that her father, for all his power, had never possessed. You mentioned the vault, Elias, Juliana said, her voice cutting through the shouting. My father spent millions trying to open it. He claimed it was a structural fluke, an empty space left by the architects. What is really down there? Elias limped toward the head of the table, his cane clicking against the polished wood. It wasn't a fluke, Juliana. It was a failsafe. Your father wanted a company built on shadows. I wanted one built on stone. Down there is that alpha ledger, the original contract of Vane and Thorne. It contains a clause that your father couldn't delete because the physical copy is the only one the law recognizes as the root of title. And what does this clause say? Sterling sneered, though his sweat was beginning to soak through his shirt. It says, Elias whispered, that in the event of a merger or a change in company structure, the founding partner with the majority of moral equity, a legal term we defined as the holder of the original patent, has the right to veto. I am that partner. And I veto this merger. The room erupted. Directors were on their phones, calling lawyers, demanding injunctions. Sterling turned to Juliana. Do something. This man is a lunatic. If this merger fails, our stock will plummet by 40% by morning. Juliana looked at the silver key in Elias's hand. She thought of her son, Leo, and the way Elias had shielded him from the car. She thought of the Iron Queen persona she had worn like a suit of armor. If he has the key, Juliana said, her voice rising above the chaos, then we go to the vault. Now. If the ledger is there, the law is the law. If it's empty, Elias, you will leave this building and never return. No police, no lawsuits, just the truth. Agreed, Elias said. The procession was surreal. The most powerful people in the city followed a man in a 20-year-old suit and a maintenance guard down into the bowels of the building. They bypassed the gleaming lobby, the executive gyms, and the server rooms, descending into the damp, concrete depths of the sublevel 4. They stopped before a massive, seamless wall of reinforced steel. There was no keypad. No biometric scanner. Just a single, tiny keyhole hidden behind a sliding brass plate that looked like a Victorian relic. Elias stepped forward. His hand shook, not from fear, but from the weight of 20 years of waiting. He inserted the silver key. Click. The sound was small, but it felt like a gunshot. The steel wall didn't swing open, it shivered, then retreated into the floor with a low, hydraulic groan. Inside was not a room full of gold or stacks of cash. It was a small, wood-paneled office, perfectly preserved. On the desk sat a single, leather-bound book and a framed photograph of a young Elias and Marcus, smiling with their arms around each other. Elias walked to the desk, his eyes misting over. He picked up the photograph and turned it over. On the back, in Marcus's handwriting, were the words, "Forgive me, Elias. I wasn't strong enough to be good." Juliana gasped, reaching for the desk to steady herself. He knew, she whispered. He knew what he did to you. He knew, Elias agreed, his voice thick with grief. And he left this failsafe because, deep down, he knew the empire he built would eventually need the man he cast out to save its soul. Suddenly, Sterling pushed forward, his face contorted with rage. I don't care about a dead man's guilt. That ledger is nothing but paper. I'll burn this whole building down before I let a janitor take my dividends. Sterling lunged for the ledger, but Juliana stepped in his path. The Iron Queen was gone, replaced by a woman who finally understood what her father had truly lost. Touch that book, Sterling, and you'll be facing a federal investigation for fraud, Juliana said, her voice cold as ice. Elias isn't the intruder here. You are. Sterling retreating into the shadows of the basement, while Elias opens the ledger to the very first page. The ink was faded, but the words were clear. The purpose of this company is to build a city for all, not a kingdom for one. The corporate war had begun, but the founder had finally returned to his map. The cold air of the subterranean vault felt like a breath of life to Elias. Around him, the directors of Vane Industries looked like statues in a museum of their own greed. Juliana stood beside him, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch the leather-bound ledger. The physical heart of the empire she had inherited but never truly understood. It's all here, Elias whispered, turning the heavy parchment pages. The original bylaws. The community trust. And the vesting clause. Sterling, cornered and desperate, let out a harsh laugh. A vesting clause? You think a 20-year-old paragraph can stop a multinational merger? Our lawyers will tie you up in court until you're dead and buried, Thorne. Elias looked at Sterling, not with anger, but with a profound, quiet pity. This isn't just a legal document, Sterling. It's a deed. My wife, Sarah, was the primary architect of the trust. She knew Marcus's nature. She insisted that if the company ever moved to dissolve its charitable foundations or merge with a hostile entity, 51% of the voting shares would automatically revert to the living founder. The room went deathly silent. Juliana gasped. The shares? They never belonged to my father. He was just a trustee. Precisely, Elias said. Marcus hid this vault because he couldn't destroy the ledger without triggering an alarm at the SEC. He hoped I'd never come back for it. He hoped I'd die in the shadows he pushed me into. Juliana looked at the book, then at Elias, then back at the photograph of the two partners. He spent his whole life trying to outrun his own conscience, she whispered. He built a skyscraper to hide a single book. The climax suddenly, the building's alarms began to wail. High above, the board's legal team had attempted to force the digital merger through, unaware that the opening of the vault had triggered a hardwired lockdown. The lights flickered and turned a deep, warning red. The system is crashing, one of the directors shouted, clutching his tablet. Everything is being wiped. It's not crashing, Elias said, his voice calm amidst the chaos. It's resetting. The company is returning to its original state. The Vane and Thorn protocols are taking over. Upstairs in the lobby, the giant digital screens that usually displayed stock prices and luxury ads suddenly flickered. The Vane Industries logo faded, replaced by the original, hand-drawn emblem of two joined hands. The names of the low-income housing projects Sarah had dreamed of, the projects that had been cancelled decades ago, began to scroll across the screens. Juliana stepped toward Elias. What happens now? If you take control, you can ruin us. You can take everything. Elias looked at his scarred, calloused hands that had mopped floors, cleaned spills, and saved a child's life. I didn't come here for revenge, Juliana. I came for the truth. I don't want to ruin the Vanes. I want to save them from themselves. Elias didn't cast Juliana out. Instead, he made her his protégé. He realized that she had been as much a prisoner of her father's legacy as he had been of the streets. Under Elias's guidance, the merger was cancelled. Vane and Thorn was reborn, not as a predatory conglomerate, but as a social enterprise. Sterling and the corrupt directors were ousted, their fraudulent dividends redirected to fund the very shelter where Elias had slept for 5 years. 1 year later, a new wing of the Vane Thorn Community Center opened in the heart of the city. It wasn't a glass skyscraper, it was a warm, brick and timber building filled with the sound of children's laughter. Juliana stood on the stage, her Iron Queen persona replaced by a genuine, relaxed warmth. Beside her stood Leo, clutching his plastic dinosaur and waving excitedly at someone in the front row. Elias sat there, dressed in a simple, high-quality suit, his cane resting against his knee. He wasn't the invisible man anymore. He was the chairman emeritus, but more importantly, he was Uncle Elias to a little boy who had taught him that life was still worth living. As the sun set over the city, Elias walked back to Vane Plaza. He didn't go to the penthouse. He went to the maintenance closet on the 4th floor. He picked up a mop, dipped it into a bucket of warm, soapy water, and made a single, clean stroke across the floor. Arthur, the old guard, walked by and smiled. Still at it, Elias? Elias leaned on his mop and looked out at the city lights. Just making sure the foundation stays clean, Arthur. Someone has to look after the soul of the building. The janitor who owned the empire had finally found his peace. He didn't need the world to see him, he only needed to know that he had protected the light. What a journey! From the shadows of a janitor's closet to the pinnacle of a corporate throne, Elias showed us that true power isn't found in a bank account, but in the courage to remain invisible until the moment truth is needed most. If you were in Elias's shoes, would you have forgiven the family that took everything from you? Or would you have burned the empire down? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If this story reminded you that everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about, please like and share this video. For more tales of hidden heroes and secret legacies, hit that subscribe button and join the Acetals family. Remember, the person you walk past today might just be the one who owns the world tomorrow. Keep your eyes open, and we'll see you in the next story.